So I've had a go at making a NixOS operating system that is an unholy abomination, but I think it could be the no compromise immutable Linux desktop for anyone.
Does this mean Ubuntu Mate has been consigned to the dustbin of history for you?
No, Ubuntu Mate's still going on here, but as you know, and maybe some of the listeners know, I now work on NixOS as my day job. And so I've been experimenting with lots of the NixOS technologies in order to see what might be possible. And sort of in friendly competition with George Castro and what he's doing with UBlue, and also borrowing some ideas from him, and he's borrowed some ideas from me. So this is kind of in reply to episode 5, where Alan sort of made a case for maybe Immutable Linux is actually the distribution model we should be looking for non-technical users to have a safe and protected environment. So I thought, well, let's try and make something like that can actually, you could give to your friends and family, and you're not handing them a foot gun when you provide them with this distribution. So this is not a distribution because that's not the way NixOS works, but it could be. So think of this as a prototype, and I was just going to talk through sort of some of the ideas I've had and how I've glued this together and how they interact with one another. So obviously NixOS is at the base of this. I'm not going to go into a deep dive of NixOS, but one of NixOS's capabilities is that it is an immutable distribution. But it's many of the other Nix and NixOS features that I think round off the important capabilities that make this viable, because I don't think the argument starts and stops with, I have an immutable distribution, therefore all things are safe. So what I've done here is taken a look at NixOS itself and used Nix to compose an operating system, but also used a tool called Home Manager. So not only is this a distribution, an operating system, it's also fully composed and configured. So the configuration file for the operating system takes care of everything to do with the boot, the kernel, the desktop environment, your applications, and how all of those things are configured. So you don't need to go grubbing around in random places. You can't anyway, because it's immutable. But this configuration file is where all of those things are managed. And this is where I think there is some frustration from some people about what immutable Linux can be, because they feel that immutable means inflexible. And with NixOS, it's actually extremely flexible to create anything you want. And this is one of the things I've been surprised by. And it's actually possible to do very complicated things with NixOS, or at least things that are more complicated in Debian and Ubuntu are way easier with Nix.
It feels like whenever the subject of immutable desktops come up, and this being a new shiny thing that people are being called to do, there's this kind of background hum of NixOS people going, oh, yeah, been there, done that. We've been doing this for ages. Is that, I'm not decrying, they may well be right, but is that fair that this has been around for a while with Nix and we're just new to the game?
Yeah, so Nix has been around for 20 years and was designed to solve the problems that we're encountering today, like 15 years ago. So it's very interesting in that respect that it had the foresight to think about where the software problems were headed and how to solve those problems. So when we've arrived at this point, and I think that's why there's a lot of interest in Nix and NixOS now, because it's solving very real problems that we're facing.
Yeah.
I actually remember, I think at FOSDEM, it must have been something like 10 years ago now, Nix had a stand and I got chatting to them. I think they were talking about something to do with voting systems at the time, but just talking to them about how it all fitted together at that point, it seemed like this, amazing forward thinking thing, which no one else had even thought of. But now, like you say, it comes along. It's like, oh yeah, they have actually been doing this for a long time.
Indeed.
The worry I have is my eyes glaze over at the point when you talk about a configuration file. We came a long way with Ubuntu in that you put a USB key in and you get a graphical installer, and what you get on the disk is the same no matter what machine you put it in, and it, in inverted commas, just works kind of thing. And I worry that you're going to scare people off with the talk of configuration, or are we just early on in this process and that will come? The automated easy installer will be something in the future.
So the automated easy installer does exist. And in fact, the system I've put together has that baked into it. So my system produces an ISO image that boots to a desktop environment and automatically launches the installer, which is a next, choose your desktop. Where are you? What language do you want? Affair. And that will install NixOS without dealing with configuration files. But what I have done is integrated the whole configuration piece in here as well. And the reason I've done this is because I wanted an operating system I could deploy, because I can deploy it, to my friends and family's machines that I look after. And what I wanted to do was create the Ubuntu-like experience. You know, it just works. Have something that users boot into. It feels comfortable. Mm-hmm. They're in command of their own destiny, but they haven't been handed a time bomb, which they can break. So here is the raw ingredients. And as I say, I have deviated from the pure Nix path here because I feel like blending some technologies together gives us some interesting approaches.
You'll be ostracized from pure Nix club, won't you?
Yes, there is this notion of impurity in Nix, and this is absolutely an impure solution.
Good, love it. Give it to me.
So, it's NixOS, and I've chosen to use the Pantheon desktop as the desktop environment, which is the desktop environment from Elementary OS. And that is presented pretty much as Elementary OS presents its desktop environment. So if you've seen Elementary, you know what to expect. It's basically that. And then I've cooked in some extra bits and pieces, like things like browsers, already configured with the appropriate security settings already enabled, because that's one of the things you can do with Nix is actually configure the software as well as make it available. So I know all of these machines have all got secure settings by default and all of the convenience tools that you would have on a desktop operating system. But as you pointed out, Alan, what you don't want to do is then say, by the way, here is this big collection of Nix files that you now have to edit if you want to add GIMP to your desktop configuration.
Exactly, yeah.
So what I have also done is I've integrated Flatpak and FlatHub into this installation. So when the session logs in, it makes sure that FlatHub and the Elementary App Center are both enabled, and the Elementary App Center graphical application is installed. And both of those app stores are configured to be in the user session rather than on the system itself.
Right.
So each user in their own home directory is where all of those applications get installed. And what that meant is when I gave my father-in-law his refreshed laptop, he was able to go into the App Center and install, for example, the Behringer application, because they've got an 18-channel digital mixer in their little home studio, and that's in FlatHub. And he just hit install, and it is an App Store-like experience. So they can go and get Spotify and Google Chrome and any other applications that they might want that are not pre-installed, that happens outside of this Nix management, but in a way that you can still ensure there's some isolation and that these applications are not treading on one another or disrupting the underlying system.
Nice. That sounds pretty neat. Have you enabled automatic updates for Flatpak and all that, or not?
No, I just let the Elementary notification system tell the user when updates are available, and they go in and hit the update button.
Right.
And how are updates to the Immutable part handled if there's a security update, or if there's a new release of a major part of this system?
You phone Martin.
You do, in fact, phone Martin. That is currently the solution. Now, I'm working on something better than that, but quite literally, the solution is have a telephone conversation with me, and I have integrated into this thing the ability to use, it's a Tailscale-like system.
Okay.
So I can SSH into their machines and I can run the updates as and when.
Right. So you would edit the config file for them.
If that config file needs editing, which actually it shouldn't ever need updating because each configuration is specific to the machine it's being deployed on with some generic desktop and default applications. But then all of the other applications that they want, they install via App Center.
Right.
That does feel like a little bit of a step backwards. You have to have your man with a beard on hand in order to update your system.
Yes.
But I appreciate this is possibly early days. I know the Fedora Silverblue people will say, we've had this for ages. But, you know, it's early days in some places for these new read-only or immutable or whatever you want to call them systems.
Yeah. So there are mechanisms to do this with Nix and NixOS. It's just I haven't figured out exactly how I want to tackle this just yet. And we work on interesting problems like this at work, and this is one of the things we've been discussing. So, you know, maybe we'll cook up something of our own as well at some point.
So what about a user like me who wants to take this system and then start running Docker containers and doing web development?
That is a very good question. And this is where I say this is for anyone, because what I've described so far is an effort to solve Alan's, let's give typical users a robust system. Now enter the rest of us who want to do development. So what I've integrated into this is a tool called DistroBox. And DistroBox, in this case, on my implementation, sits on top of Podman, which is a Docker compatible runtime. And with DistroBox, you can get any version of any popular distribution. And so what I do is I grab the current Ubuntu that I'm working on, current Debian that I'm working on, maybe Alpine from time to time, bit of Fedora. But the way DistroBox works is it automatically hooks up all of the sockets and services and home directory with your current user. So when you enter the container for, say, Ubuntu that I've just created with DistroBox, my home directory, all of my settings, all of my Nix configuration, anything that's managed within the container or out of the container is all integrated. So it's a completely seamless environment. So I stand up my various development environments for, let's call them foreign distributions, using DistroBox. And sometimes I use my own wrapper for QEMU, QuickEMU for doing the same in virtual machines.
So from that, you can do anything? Are there any limitations to what you can run? I mean, it has to be able to run inside Docker/Podman, but are there limitations? I'm not a big Docker Podman user.
Not really, no. I mean, if you want to test kernels, then yes, you want a virtual machine rather than a container.
Yeah.
I've chosen Podman because it has init support, so it integrates with systemd. So if you actually want to boot the container, you know, with a PID1, you can do that and you can actually run like proper distributions inside it. But using that, I've been able to move all of my Ubuntu and Debian development workflows into these containers, but it seamlessly just connects to my home directory and all of my tooling's available. But you can even do things like install, I mean, you wouldn't want to do this, but you can. You could install Spotify inside one of those containers, and the X socket and the Pulse socket and everything are all hooked up. So when you run Spotify, it's running on that Ubuntu container, but it's just a graphical application on the desktop at that point.
Neat.
I guess Spotify is probably a bad example, but like if there was anything that only had a specific way to be distributed, like MATLAB or some like piece of software that wasn't available in the Nix repositories, isn't as a flat pack, you know, has a weird thing that you have to download and install.
Yeah.
Then you could do that inside DistroBox, right?
You could, yes.
Nice.
And you could, you know, choose to run that application from whichever distribution happens to have the version with the features that you want available. So I was doing some testing with VMAF, which is the Netflix video quality profiling tool. And there's a static binary available of FFmpeg that's got all of this built in. And that works fine on Ubuntu, but because Nix and the unusual way that it's built, it didn't execute on Nix. So I just ran that in the Ubuntu container, because I can still access all of the files I want to process because they're all sat in my home directory and all just readily available. So, I've just been able to mix and match where I've found little gaps like that.
So are you drinking your own champagne right now?
I am right now. Right now, I am doing that very thing. Yes.
So if this episode comes out, then that was probably successful.
It was. And I'll put a link in the show notes to my Nix configuration that makes all of this possible. And that's a developing project. And if anyone's interested in learning, then stop by. And if you want to help improve things, then do that too.
I have been flying Steam Deck Airlines. That doesn't mean I've been playing aeroplane games on my Steam Deck. It means I've been in an airplane with my Steam Deck, specifically 2 airplanes. I went to America for a conference last week, and I thought, this is my first conference that I've been to since I bought a Steam Deck. I should probably take it with me, and I'll be able to use it on the plane, because it was a 9 or 10 hour flight. I thought, I'm going to get bored, and planes are notoriously small for getting laptops out, and I'm notoriously big for not having enough room near me in order to get the laptop out. So I need something else I can play with. So I thought, I'll take my Steam Deck. So I asked on Mastodon if anyone had any recommendations, like I don't already have tons of games on my Steam Deck. I asked for additional recommendations of games that I could play offline specifically. And I got a load of recommendations, and I ended up buying 4 different games because there was the Steam summer sale on. And so I got 4 games for about £12-15, something like that, which was a pretty good deal, I thought. And then made sure my Steam Deck was fully charged and I had all the updates downloaded, and then jumped on a plane and played some games.
So which games did you play, and how did it go after playing for, let's say, about 2 hours and possibly getting a bit low on battery?
Haha. So I got recommended 4 games, like I said, but I really only played one of them to death. And that was Vampire Survivors.
I knew you were going to say that because I also own Vampire Survivors.
I'll come back to that, but someone else suggested, they looked at my Steam profile and saw what games were in it and said, you haven't clocked up much time in Fez. You should probably play that, which I thought was, a bit weird, but also excellent. And I also got A Short Hike, Goto Roboto, I think. And I got a couple of others, which I didn't play much of. One was Pony Island, which are the 4 that I picked up. And I pretty much played Vampire Survivors most of the flight. And the battery life wasn't a problem, because even though it was like a 9-hour flight, I get a little bit fatigued playing games for a long period. And so I didn't try and play for the whole flight. It wouldn't have worked anyway. I don't know how long the battery lasts, but Vampire Survivors is not a particularly power hungry game. It's a 2D pixel art style horde romp, whatever you call it. And I also took a spare battery with me. It was a recommendation that Martin sent about a year ago when he was buying a ThinkPad. He said, get this battery, you can power your laptop off of it. And I've never powered my laptop off of that battery, but I have powered my Steam Deck off of it.
We're not talking about a AA battery. This is like a power bank kind of battery.
It is a monster power bank. Yes, 100 watts monster power bank that has a little display that tells you how much, capacity and time it's got left. Anyway, I played that game on and off all the way there, and I permanently had the Steam Deck attached to the battery, and I had Sony Link-Bud Bluetooth headphones, and that was great because it blotted out some of the airline noise while I was playing the games. And the thumping soundtrack in Vampire Survivors is a very good distraction from the fact that you're sat on a plane.
And how did you sort of position yourself while you were playing? Did you have it rested on something, or were you holding it up in front of your face? And how do you find it as an actual sort of handheld on-the-go device?
So a couple of things worth noting. I managed to get an empty seat next to me on both the flight out there and on the flight back, which meant I could have the battery and the case and the Steam Deck on the seat next to me when I wasn't playing with it, which meant I could just pick it up and use it. For some of the time, I just had it in my hands, like looking down, but I got a bit of a crick in my neck. So the table on the planes that I was on is one of those half tables that you flip down and then fold out again. Mm-hmm. And so I just had it half out. And it also meant that having an empty chair next to me meant I could put my in-flight red wine on the chair, the table next to me, and use the table in front of me for holding my hands. I think that's what I did most of the time, was just have my fists rested on the table in front of me playing the Steam Deck. And it was glorious. It was great. Mm-hmm. It really helped pass the time quite a bit. But I didn't use it for the whole flight, obviously. I watched a film and I ate and snoozed a bit and had some drink and chat to people. But yeah, it was great. I'd highly recommend it. If you do a lot of flying and you like a bit of PC gaming, get a Steam Deck.
So I know you've got smaller handheld games devices. Were you not tempted to use any of those in preference to the Steam Deck?
I'm glad you asked. I did actually take my MiU Mini with me and did not get it out once.
Oh, really?
Yep. I tend to do all my emulation on the smaller handheld devices like the MiU and the Clockwork Pi, and I don't do any emulation on the Steam Deck. I only do native PC stuff on the Steam Deck. But I didn't play with the MiU at all. I just played with the Steam Deck. And I was quite happy.
Interesting. So, knowing what you know now, would you buy another smaller retro-orientated handheld?
Yeah, because I don't take my Steam Deck everywhere. And sometimes if I'm on a train, for example, I might pull out the MiU, or if I'm waiting for one of the kids or something, I might pull it out and have a play with that. But I'm not going to cart my Steam Deck around everywhere because it's just a bit of a hassle because it's quite big and cumbersome. But for flights, it's perfect.
Yeah.
I might buy another mini computing device because the MiU Mini has a tiny screen and my eyes are getting bad. And I might get one with a slightly bigger screen. But yeah, I'm well happy with it. And I'll continue to take it on planes.
I usually take mine with me when I go on visits to the office for work. So I go down to Brighton for a few days at a time. So it's excellent to take on the train and also to have in my hotel room. Like, I don't want to take another laptop for gaming. I just have the Steam Deck and then whip that out and sit at the desk in the hotel and play with it in the evenings. It's really good for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I would have the phone playing podcasts, listening to that while playing games in the hotel room. Absolutely. Works perfectly.
You may remember on a previous episode, I spoke about developing a GNOME extension. Well, I have now published a GNOME extension.
Oh, get you.
Mm.
So at the time of recording, you can go to extensions.gnome.org and you can search for Advanced Sound Recorder. And if you're running GNOME and you have the relevant browser extension and other bit of software that you need running, you can then just click the switch to turn it on the website, which is quite clever. And then it actually installs it and run it. And I just want to talk a bit about what the experience of publishing an extension to the website was like.
Before we get into the publishing, can I ask you, did you change your application at all? Because when we last spoke, you were using PA-CTL to dump JSON and parse JSON. Did you stick with that solution, or did you find a, in air quotes, official way to get at that stuff?
As it stands, the version that's published is almost exactly as it was last time we spoke, with a few minor modifications that I'll mention towards the end.
All right.
So publishing a GNOME extension was a much nicer experience than developing it, I'm glad to say. There is quite extensive documentation that covers the review process, which starts with just some sort of general guidelines of things to think about, plus some really specific examples of things you should do and not do. Like there's an initialization routine, there's an enable and a disable routine that you get as part of every extension, and it tells you what you should and shouldn't be doing in those quite clearly. So, you don't want to be loading your entire extension when it just runs the init routine. You only want it to do that once you enable it, things like that. They also provide some notes on the coding style you should follow and an ESLint file to automatically apply that coding style and tell you anywhere you violated it, which all really helpful stuff to do. Another thing that I wanted to do was when you create your metadata file in your extension, you tell it which versions of GNOME Shell it supports. And I'm running Ubuntu Jammy Jellyfish, which doesn't run the latest version of GNOME. It runs a couple of versions back. So I wanted to also know if it ran on the latest versions of GNOME. So I went trying to work out a good way of doing this. And there is a distribution called GNOME-OS, which if you go to os.gnome.org, you can get like a nightly build of GNOME-OS, which has the latest version of GNOME on. But I didn't just want to test it on the latest version, I also wanted the version in between. So I did a bit of hunting around and found that if you go to download.gnome.org/GNOME-OS, you can actually find an archive of ISO files to run previous versions. And it literally just boots into GNOME Shell, no frills, that's all it does. It's not designed to be a distribution that you use, it's just for testing things on GNOME. So I managed to run that in a VM and then download my extension. I basically cloned it off GitHub while I was still developing and ran it. That threw up some interesting edge cases, because bearing in mind that the audio devices that you get in a VM aren't necessarily the same as the ones that you get on an actual desktop. So, for example, I control the volume by looking for the left channel, and it was a mono output in the VM, so I had to account for that. Also, the latest version of GNOME-OS is now running Pipewire, so things are a little bit different than stuff that's just running Pulse Audio. I think it's running Pulse Audio as well as Pipewire, so I could still use the PACTL commands to actually do what I needed to do, but I had to take into account the fact that it was running Pipewire.
Were the PACTL commands pre-installed everywhere that you might install this extension?
Yes, they were already on GNOME-OS at least, so I didn't have any trouble there. I suppose maybe I should have some sort of detection there just to flag if basically I think if you try to do it, then in the extension manager in GNOME, it would show you an error when it tries to initialize and enumerate the interfaces that you've got. So yes, maybe it would be nice if there was a user-friendly warning if that happened. So with all this tested, basically you package everything up as a zip file and you upload it to gnome.extensions.org. There's a page there called Add Yours, and you upload a zip file and tick a thing to say, yes, it's GPL2 licensed and whatever. I had a really weird issue with this where I couldn't get it to work in a confined browser. It kept on basically not submitting the form, and I actually got some help. I raised an issue on the GNOME GitLab, and someone there was trying to help me debug it and had no idea what was going on, because I had no idea what was going on. And then I tried it in Edge, which was installed from a deb package, and everything just worked. So I haven't had that happen on any other websites, but it was just a very bizarre experience.
It's worth noting that GNOME actually has an extensions application now. So you can install the extensions application and you get a window in which there's a button. It's like a cut down version of an app store where it shows you a list of all the extensions that are currently installed, and there's a browse button where you can search and install additional extensions. So you don't necessarily have to go to extensions.gnome.org and get it that way in a browser. You can just install it. And I don't know which version of GNOME that came with, but the one I'm running on 2304 has it.
Yeah, I haven't actually had a problem installing them through the browser. It was just uploading them for some reason.
Okay.
But once I used an unconfined browser, it was fine. So once you have successfully uploaded it, it gets reviewed and approved, hopefully, by a human who reviews it. And then it's there for people to install, which is quite neat.
How many people have installed it so far?
When I wrote my notes, 928 people.
Wow.
Oh, that's not too shabby.
No.
That's nice.
You've made a popular thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then subsequent reviews are quite neat. So you just upload another zip file with all of your stuff in, and it creates a new version for you. I think if you just change metadata rather than changing any code, it just gets published. If you do change code, it then needs another review. But what it'll do is look at what was in the last zip file that was approved and look what was in the one you uploaded, and it'll actually create a diff on the website, which you and the reviewer can both see. So it makes it easy to see what was changed and make sure you're not trying to sneak in anything nasty.
Nice.
So you've talked there about testing on multiple different versions of GNOME. Does this imply that it's wedged to known published versions? Your extension won't automatically roll over to whatever the next version of GNOME is and work there unless you specifically say it's supported on that version, or is that problem solved now?
I think when the next version of GNOME comes out, I will have to update my metadata file to say it supports it for you to be able to install it through the installation mechanisms. You could, I believe, still download the zip file from the website and just plonk it in the right directory and it'll run, I think. But yeah, your metadata has to specify which versions of GNOME Shell are supported.
Right.
I don't actually foresee any, from the experience I've had, I don't foresee any actual compatibility issues because, my extension is quite basic. I can't see what they would do that would break it horribly in just an incremental release of GNOME. But we shall see.
Watch this space in a future episode where Mark explains how he has to update his extension because it broke in GNOME 50.
Yes. And I have done a little bit of further development. So particularly something that I came across when I was testing in the VMs was the way that it formats the list of interfaces was basically based on the length of the name of the device and the interfaces. And if you had no device name or a short name for the interface, then you ended up with a really, really tiny slider to control the volume. It was basically whatever space was left afterwards, which could be basically no space at all. So I did want it to make it so they were all the same size, and then whatever space was left was sort of filled in between sort of short names and long names and so on. I didn't quite manage to do that. I did manage to make it so that they will be at least 200 pixels wide, but they might be wider than that. It turns out, as I found before, developing GNOME extensions isn't terribly easy. And even as, I approach this from the mindset of, well, it's JavaScript and CSS. I'm a web developer for a living. This should be easy, right? But actually working out how all of the elements next to each other sit and how they're styled isn't easy. There is a thing called Looking Glass, which lets you sort of inspect elements, but doing that on elements within a menu isn't easy either. I had to install another GNOME extension, and even then I found it difficult to get the information I needed. So I basically got it working well enough and left it.
Ship it.
Yes. So with that where it is, for my purposes, I'm now going to call it feature complete and say I'm done with developing GNOME extensions for the time being.
And so people can file issues where?
DevNull. You are welcome to file issues on my GitHub. If you can submit a patch that actually shows me how you're supposed to do things, then even better.
I like how I submitted a patch and you didn't know until I mentioned it and you were like, oh, did you? But it was a very simple patch that was inconsequential.
Yes, thank you for that.
No worries. No worries.
Well, congratulations on publishing your extension, Mark. Well done, you.
Yeah, well done.
Thank you.